Okay, joining us now for the first campaign edition of Viewpoint, joining us live from Melbourne is the Resources Minister, Josh Frydenberg. Thanks for joining us, Josh.
Nice to be with you, Chris.
Well, there's been a lot of preparation, a lot of toing and froing. Finally, it's underway, even though it's such an elongated campaign. The first point I wanted to put to you, as someone desperately seeking to hold on to power for the government, is that your pitch largely is going to be about stability. We heard it from Malcolm Turnbull today, that you've got an economic plan, that you're making progress, that people should stick to the government for a bit of stability so they can deliver that. How can you actually make this pitch for stability when you changed your own leader not 8 months ago?
Well, every member of the coalition team is kicking in the same direction, Chris. When we signed up to become members of Parliament, indeed members of the Liberal Party and the National Party, we did so because of its values, free enterprise, the individual and freedom. Now, all those values are upheld and put forward by our policies, but they're an anathema to Bill Shorten and his big taxing, big spending, big union agenda.
We'll come to that agenda, but 3 years ago you said the coalition would put an end to this sort of leadership, poll-driven, media-driven leadership merry-go-round, and yet you've gone down that same path yourself.
Look, the Australian people are not interested in what has transpired in the past. What they're interested about is which is the party and the leader with a better economic plan for the future, and we have laid that out very clearly and will continue to do so through this campaign. The first thing I want to say is that the Australian economy is going well, Chris. We have economic growth at around 3%, which is faster than the United States or the UK or Japan or other nations. Unemployment's coming down. Importantly, youth unemployment is coming down, and that's because of our policies, whether it's our $50 billion infrastructure rollout, whether it's the Prime Minister's increased spending on defence, whether it's the innovations statement, which is giving a help to entrepreneurs and creating that start-up culture that we need in this country, and of course those free trade agreements which have supercharged our exports, whether you're a cray fisherman in Tasmania, whether you're a wine producer in South Australia, or whether you're a dairy farmer in Victoria, you are benefiting hugely from those free trade agreements with China, Japan and Korea. That's our record, and we will continue to put forward new policies, as well as, of course, our budget document, which was very important, as being our blueprint for the future.
It's pretty cruel of you to talk about crayfish and wine at this time of night, but looking at that economic development narrative you're laying out there, it's also a big weakness for the government because you promised to repair the budget. We've just had the budget last week reveal a $40 billion deficit this year. You've blown out the deficit from when Labor was, handed you government, and next year the budget deficit's still going to be $37 billion. You've still got spending at almost 26% of GDP. You have not delivered the budget repair you promised.
Well, that's not right, Chris.
Which of those numbers was wrong? Which of those figures was wrong?
Well, the important point is the trajectory. You just referred to 26% of GDP of spending.
25.8, 25.8 this year and 25.8 next year.
No, it is going down to 25.2 over the forward estimates. And importantly, we inherited spending growth at 3.7% per annum. Now, we've got that under 2%, and if you look at the budget deficit forecasts, we'll get down to $6 billion by the end of the forward estimates, which will be 0.3% of GDP. That's the budget repair job that is needed. Now, of course, getting your legislation through the Senate to create savings has proven to be pretty difficult. We've been successful in a number of areas, but 88% of all government spending is tied to legislation. And you would have noticed that we didn't have control of the Senate. We had some tough times with the Greens and the crossbenchers in the Senate. But we are very determined, as we have done through Matthias Cormann and Scott Morrison, to bring spending under control, and the budget forecasts show that we will continue to do that. With Labor, you get $100 billion worth of new taxes, billions of dollars worth of unfunded spending promises, and the debt will be left to the next generation, and that will be a greater burden than the $1 billion a month we're already paying in interest on Labor's debt.
Well, there is no doubt that Labor's plan is going to be a high-taxing, it is a high-taxing, high-spending plan. But let me put this to you. Labor are not going to deliver the company tax cuts that that Scott Morrison outlined last week. Now, we know that the cost of those to the budget nominally is $48 billion. Because Labor are not going to deliver all of those, they've just agreed to the very early cut for small business. Labor will now go into the election costing business and pocket virtually all of that $48 billion as savings. They will say that they have savings up their sleeve of almost $48 billion, even though it's effectively higher taxes. But this means that aren't they going to be able to tell voters during this election campaign that their budget bottom line in the out years will be better than yours?
Well, Labor's position is ludicrous because the whole point about having a company tax cut is that it actually stimulates investment. And on the budget's own numbers, you're going to see over the medium and longer term up to 1% boost to GDP as a result of these tax cuts. Now, history is important here. When the 30% company tax rate was put in Australia in 2001, we had the 10th lowest in the OECD, and there are 34 nations in the OECD. Today, we have the 6th highest company tax rate in the OECD. The UK had a 30% tax cut, a company tax rate when we did back in 2001, and you know what theirs is today? 20%, and they're going down to 17% by 2020. The world has recognised that business is not very sentimental, capital is mobile, and unless you have competitive company tax rates, you won't be able to attract investment, particularly to a country like Australia. So this is an extremely important reform. We're doing it over a gradual time period, over a number of years, and Labor cannot avoid these company tax cuts and then claim that the economy will be as strong as it will be under us.
Okay, we see that election campaigns are increasingly presidential. There's no doubt this is going to be largely a battle between Malcolm Turnbull and Bill Shorten. What do you think Malcolm Turnbull's greatest strengths are?
Well, I think the Australian people trust him. I think the Australian people can see that this is a self-made person who is very genuine about his vision for Australia, and the fact that his innovation agenda, for example, was so warmly received reflected the fact that that is where his personal experience is. And if you wanted to put a bank account with Bill Shorten or with Malcolm Turnbull, I think every day of the week someone would leave it with Malcolm Turnbull.
Okay, then what are Malcolm Turnbull's weaknesses? What's his greatest weakness?
Well, I don't think I could point out his weaknesses. I mean, obviously, we'd all like to, to see immediate results in particular areas overnight. And, every politician has that particular weakness. But, Malcolm Turnbull has an enormous amount of strengths. And I think, that is what has been reflected in the polls when you compare how he is perceived compared to Bill Shorten, who has plenty of weaknesses.
Well, you don't like talking about weaknesses, though, so what are Bill Shorten's strengths?
Well, I can't give him a tick on anything, but I can tell you what his weaknesses are, Chris, and that is, this. I'm not going to, I'm going to tell you what I think Bill Shorten's weaknesses are. And, the fact is that last year's budget reply, he was talking about a company tax cut. This year, he's walked away from it. A year ago, and even as recently as March, his party's position, was against the Bank Royal Commission on the eve of an election. He's talking about one. He was against the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement. Now he claims he's for one. On Turn Back the Boats, he was against it. Now he's for it. You can go through this whole shopping list of issues where he has flip-flopped.
How's he been on climate change policy?
Well, it's another one. I thought, he wasn't going to give us a carbon tax, and now we know that he is.
But isn't this something Labor will use against Malcolm Turnbull, flip-flopping on climate policy?
Malcolm Turnbull has absolutely reaffirmed his commitment to our multifaceted policy, which, as you know, has the Emissions Reduction Fund, has our Paris targets, has what we're doing around energy efficiency, a 40% boost by 2030. Of course, we've now put in place the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and the ARENA fund that we, was a previous position of the government to not go through. Now we are going through with it.
Now, just briefly before we wrap up, Peter Credlin's joined Sky News in the last 48 hours. She is, of course, Tony Abbott's former Chief of Staff, very prominent, a very polarising figure within your government and in that change of leadership. Is that going to be a problem for the government, having her out there commentating on its performance day in, day out? I mean, heaven forbid I should point out that former political advisors get involved in the media, but I'm just interested in Peter Credlin in particular, whether there's concerns from the government.
Look, it doesn't matter if you're Peter Credlin or Peter Costello. Everyone can say what they like, but this government is very much focused on implementing our economic agenda. It won't matter what the commentators say. We'll continue to pursue and promote our policies, and we believe that will be a winner with the Australian people, because they'll look at our record, they'll look at what the alternative is with Bill Shorten, and they will re-elect the Turnbull government.
Well, just in a similar vein, then, can we expect to see Tony Abbott and Malcolm Turnbull at the same functions sometimes throughout this campaign?
I don't have that sort of crystal ball, Chris. I can't tell you, but I'm sure Tony Abbott will be doing everything he can to assist the Turnbull government get re-elected. Indeed, he's a member of the Parliament, a member of the party, a member of the government, and obviously has done a lot in his time to ensure good policy in this country too.
Thanks for joining us, Josh Frydenberg. Appreciate you joining us on Viewpoint, and hopefully catch up with you later in the campaign.
Good to be with you.
There we go, Josh Frydenberg, the Resources Minister, joining us from Melbourne. We're going to take a break now. When we come back,